بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم الحمد لله رب العالمين اللهم صل وسلم على سيدنا محمد الفاتح لما أغلق والخاتم لما سبق ناصر الحق والحق الهادي إلى الصراط المستقيم. Bismillah. Apologies for the delay. Allahumma salli ala Sayyidina Muhammad. Better late than never, as they say. Alhamdulillah. Jazakumullah khair for joining us. This is the first of our sessions, inshallah, looking at the Imams of Hadramawt, radiallahu anhum wa nafa'na bihim. And in part of the Dawrah, we're trying to recreate something of the Dawrah atmosphere remotely in our different locations in different parts of the world. And big part of the Dawrah is not just about the classes and attending the lessons and the learning which takes place, although that is obviously a major part, but it's also about the connection, visiting the places that connect us back to ultimately to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala through those who are beloved to him and beloved to his Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam. And of course we can't physically visit them here in our different places around the world, but inshallah one day we will get to visit them. But these sessions are aimed at trying to just introduce some of those great Imams of Hadramawt, of the Valley of Hadramawt, and who traveled elsewhere and spread the deen. Obviously when we look at the shuyukh who are teaching, Habib Kalim, Habib Omar, it's not just them just come out of nothing. There's a long tradition which they come from, which connects this unbroken chain, this sanad which connects them back to the Rasul sallallahu alaihi wasallam. And it's important that we understand where that knowledge comes from, where that tradition comes from, with the roots. We follow the chain back to its roots. We look at the people in each generation who preserved that knowledge and transmitted that knowledge. So we get to understand, we get a picture of where it all comes from, and where the teaching is rooted and where it's embedded, and where it came from, essentially. And love is the key, to be honest. Love is the key to everything in this deen. Man laysa lahu mahabba. The one who has no mahabba hasn't even got mahabba, has nothing. The love of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, love of the Rasul sallallahu alaihi wasallam, love of the Ahlul Bayt, love of the Sahaba, love of the Tabi'een, love of the Salaf, love of the Salihin, Salihat. That is the essence of this deen. And if you're missing that, you're missing out on a huge element of the deen, a huge part of the deen. So inshallah, by looking at the lives of some of these great people, we'll increase in love for them. And love is based upon knowledge. You can't love someone you don't know. When we talk about love of the Rasul sallallahu alaihi wasallam, we study his seerah, we study the shama'il, we look in detail at his life, we look into his description, his physical description, the qualities, everything about him sallallahu alaihi wasallam. That allows us to build a picture of who he was. We study his hadith, we study his statements, we study his mawaqif, we study the stances which he took, and that allows us to increase in knowledge and increase in love for him. Likewise with these people of the past, the more we know about them, the more we can appreciate who they were. Although in reality we can't, we can't really describe the states which they reached, the physical states, the spiritual states which they reached, the knowledge which they attained. But we can have have an attempt. We can provide some information about them, put some context to that. And inshallah, it's a means of closeness to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. So bismillah. I'm supposed to be joined by a special guest. I don't know what's happened to him. But inshallah he'll be joining us soon. But we're going to do some introductions, inshallah, to the topic and to setting the scene a little bit. Just getting used to the system here. I need to be able to share the screen. See the Isa, inshallah. I have a display. Bismillah. Okay. Bismillah. Should be working now. 1 second. Bismillah. So Imams of Hadramawt, an introduction. Bismillah. So first, let's set the scene a little bit. First of all, Yemen, obviously. Yemen is a blessed place. There's several references to Yemen in the Quran. We're studying, obviously, the Imams who are from the people of Yemen. So Yemen is a blessed place mentioned in the Quran. We have Saba, we have Bilqis, and the Masjid of Bilqis. We have different kind of references to Yemen in the Quran. We have Nabi Hud, who we'll talk a little bit about that later. We have the Prophet ﷺ made many references to Yemen himself, the merits of Yemen. He prayed for blessings, for barakah. Allah barak lana fi Yemenina. In Sahih Hadith, he said, Allah bless us in our Yemen. And of course, the dua of the Prophet ﷺ is answered, and it is hasil. You know, if the Prophet ﷺ prayed for barakah in a place or in a person or a thing, have no doubt that that Allah blessed that place and that thing. He said, "And the best of men are the men of Yemen. Belief is Yemeni, and ana Yemani, and I am Yemeni." He himself regarded himself as being from, due to lineage and due to other connections, he is from the Yemen. And he has a connection, strongest of connection to Yemen. Yemen is Yemeni, and the people of Mecca and Medina, they have the strongest of connections to Yemen. The origins are from Yemen, and that's a long discussion we won't go into at the moment. But he also says, he praised the people of Yemen and loved the people of Yemen, those who came to him, especially the Ash'ariyun, the people of what is now Tihama, Zabid. They came to him, he praised them. He said they had the softest souls and the most gentle hearts. Faith is Yemeni, and wisdom is Yemeni. Al-Imanu Yemani, wal-Hikma Yemaniya. So there's many references and hadith that talk about the greatness of Yemen as a place. The word Yemen itself has the context of blessings, human, of good things. And then he would mention Hadramawt. Hadramawt is a valley in the east of Yemen. Sometimes Yemen is when we talk about Yemen, it sometimes refers to the north, what's only the north, and Hadramawt is almost like a separate place. But nonetheless, Hadramawt is part of modern day Yemen, although Yemen is perhaps splitting once again. But anyway, yeah, Hadramawt is a valley in Yemen, and it has a long history. It's al-Ahqaf, the surah, have a whole surah called al-Ahqaf in the Quran, which is understood to refer to the valley of Hadramawt, and it's a place where the Prophet Hud alayhi salam lived with his people, Ad. And the word Hadramawt has the meaning of death. Hadar al-Maut is a death. Death has come, and it's understood that one of the reasons for that name being given is that Prophet Salih alayhi salam traveled to the valley with his followers, and when he reached the valley, he died, and was said Hadar al-Maut, or death has come. So that's one interpretation. So there's definitely the presence of not just Nabi Hud, but other prophets as well in the valley of Hadramawt, very ancient prophets. And some of them we know, some of them we don't know. And the Prophet himself ﷺ mentioned Hadramawt specifically in a Sahih Hadith, and he said that Allah will complete this affair until a horseman may travel from Sana'a to Hadramawt, fearing no one but Allah, or wolves getting to his sheep. Okay, there'll come a time when there's complete safety and stability. Someone can travel safely from Sana'a, the old capital of Yemen, and the present day capital, to Hadramawt, to the province, to the region of Hadramawt, or the valley of Hadramawt. And in the lifetime of the Prophet ﷺ, the people of Hadramawt accepted Islam. There was delegations of Wufud came to the Prophet ﷺ from, not just from the north part of Yemen, but also from Hadramawt, and accepted Islam. And the Sahaba were sent, the Prophet sent delegation. The delegations came from Hadramawt, and the Prophet sent Sahaba to the Hadramawt as well. Amongst them, Ziyad bin Labid al-Ansari, who was from the Ansar. He was appointed as the governor of Hadramawt, or the Amir of Hadramawt. And then Tarim, the city of Tarim, where the Muslim is located, where the Dawrah is taking place, that it is a blessed city, has its origins at least a century before the Common Era, you know, at least 100 BC. And Tarim is the name of its founder. The word Tarim comes from the name of the founder. Tarim was a person who founded the city. Has other names. It's known as al-Ghanna. Tarim al-Ghanna, it had lush. It's known for its lush orchards and greenery and water, which is still there. There's still lush date groves around Tarim, but not less so than there was in the past. It's famous for when the Prophet ﷺ passed away, the tribes, some of the tribes around Tarim, refused to give their allegiance to Abu Bakr. They said, "No, we were allegiance to Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam. Abu Bakr was not. It wasn't part of the package to sign up to, you know, to allegiance to Sayyidina Abu Bakr Siddiq." But the people of Tarim, to a man, they remained loyal to Abu Bakr, and as soon as he was made Khalifa, they pledged allegiance to him. Radiallahu anhu. And the news was conveyed to him, and he prayed for the people of Tarim in three supplications that the city remain inhabited until the Day of Judgment. Okay, remain inhabited, remain flourishing and prosperous, and so on. That it be blessed with abundant water. Okay, which is very important in any place, but especially in such a dry and hot climate. And that it be blessed with abundant pious people. That pious people come up from the earth like shoots. You know, shoots come up from the earth in every generation, and those du'as were answered. As far as we can see, the du'as have been answered, and it's sometimes called Madinat al-Siddiq because of that connection, the city of al-Siddiq, because of that connection to him, radiallahu anhu. So it was from the time of the earliest of days is a place of connection. Connection to Allah and the Messenger sallallahu alaihi wasallam. The Sahaba were there. Some of the Sahaba who were involved in some of the conflicts with those who had left Islam or refused to pledge allegiance to Sayyidina Abu Bakr. There was some conflict that took place, and some of the Sahaba were wounded and died and were buried in Tarim. And it continued as a religious center. The Tabi'een, the time of the Tabi'een, it grew as a religious center of the region. Okay, and two main tribes were significant. It became significant: al-Fadl and al-Khatib. Al-Fadl, al-Khatib. Al-Khatib were the descendants of the companion Abbad bin Bishr, radiallahu anhu. So what the point is that Tarim is from the earliest of days is a place of deen. The masajid are built. The deen is taught and preserved in Tarim. The Imams we're going to talk about, they come later. And we'll get to that, inshallah. But before that, we'll just mention briefly a very important point, which is the fadl of Ahlul Bayt. The Imams we're talking about here are from the Ahlul Bayt of the Prophet ﷺ. It's important to realize their fadl, their merit in the sight of Allah and His Messenger. Allah, إِنَّمَا يُرِيدُ اللَّهُ لِيُذْهِبَ عَنْكُمْ رِجْسَ أَهْلِ الْبَيْتِ وَيُطَهِّرَكُمْ تَطْهِيرًا. This verse in Surah Al-Ahzab, Allah's wish is only to remove impurity from you, O people of the house, and to purify you thoroughly. This is an address to the people of the house, the Ahlul Bayt of the Prophet ﷺ. A sign of Allah's care and concern for them, and His desire and wish to raise them, to purify them, to elevate them. And two hadith I've chosen here. Leaving in you, or amongst you, in you, that which if you firmly hold on to, you will not go astray after me. Okay, I'm leaving with you two things which if you hold on to them, you will not go astray. The book of Allah and my family, the people of my household, Ahlul Bayt. Itrati Ahlul Bayt. These two will not be separated until they meet at the pool. Okay, the book and the itra or the Ahl will remain together until they come to the Prophet ﷺ, they come to the Prophet at the pool, the Hawd, and on Yawm al-Qiyamah. So take care at how you look after them once they have gone. Okay, so look after them. Be concerned for the book of Allah, and be concerned for the itra. Okay, give these things their proper haqq, because they are what the Prophet has left with us. Okay, the other less strong narration mentions the book of Allah and the Sunnah of the Prophet ﷺ. The stronger narrations mention the Ahl, the family of the Prophet ﷺ. And there's no contradiction in that. That the people who embodied the Sunnah of the Prophet ﷺ were the Ahl, were the family of the Prophet ﷺ. So you want to understand the Sunnah, you understand the book, you see embodied in the people of the house. Okay, beginning from Sayyidina Fatima, Sayyidina Ali, Sayyidina Hassan and Hussein, and their descendants. And of course, the wives of the Prophet ﷺ as well. The wider meaning of the Ahl includes the wives and the other members of his household. And then this other famous hadith narrated by Abu Dharr, who held onto the door of the Kaaba and called out to people that this is reminding them of the fadl of the Ahlul Bayt. That I heard the Prophet ﷺ saying that the likeness of the people of my house among you is a likeness of Noah's Ark, Safinat Nuh, to his people. Okay, whoever boards it is safe, and whoever lags behind will drown. Okay, in other words, board the ship of Ahlul Bayt, or else suffer the consequences. Okay, many other hadiths that talk about the whole essence of our faith is love of the family. That if you don't love them, then they have no faith. And many other narrations, the one who hates the Ahlul Bayt or hates Sayyidina Ali that's a reflection of nifaq, of hypocrisy, and many other narrations. So it's important to give this thing its haqq, and give it this we attempt to give the Ahlul Bayt their right that the Prophet ﷺ clearly mentioned. This is his wasiyah. This is the Prophet ﷺ leaving these things behind and telling us to be concerned, and that was the way of the companions. They understood this reality. They lived by this, and that's how that's how the Ahlul Sunnah lived, with that intense love for Ahlul Bayt, giving them their true haqq, not going to an extreme to the point of giving them infallibility or making them more than they were, but giving them the haqq which the Prophet ﷺ, or attempting to give them the haqq which the Prophet ﷺ informed of. This is khususiyah that we recognize, that Allah decides to give certain people certain qualities and certain merits above others, and it's not, we don't have a choice in that. We just recognize that. Just like praying in the Masjid al-Haram is not the same as praying in Scotland, for example. That's just khususiyah. Allah has decided that place has 100,000 salawat rewarded for just one prayer in that place. Okay, it's different. We just recognize that fadl, and there's no rationality doesn't come into that. It's something which Allah has just decreed. And those who struggle to accept that are in the category of Iblis, unfortunately. Iblis refused to accept the khususiyah that was given to Sayyidina Adam alayhi salam, refused to prostrate, refused to see beyond just the physical. The Ahlul Bayt are just flesh and blood like everyone else, but they have something which is something beyond that, which is not perceivable to the eye, but it's given. So we respect the khususiyah. Iblis couldn't recognize the khususiyah and refused to prostrate, and he was cast out as a result. He had a certain criteria for judging things, and his criteria were not Allah's criteria. So that's just a kind of prelude to what we're talking about here. This history. Do we have guest Sayyid Ahmed? Has he joined us now? Hopefully he's there somewhere. Anyway, hopefully you can. Anyway, we move on to the next. Oh, sorry. So so if we begin, having introduced the Hadramawt and Tarim and the Ahlul Bayt, we'll begin with the first of the Ahlul Bayt to come to Yemen, Imam Al-Muhajir Ahmed bin Isa. Here's kind of where the story begins. Ahmed bin Isa, and we have his lineage there, which says it all really. The lineage is enough to know who he was by how he relates to the beloved sallallahu alaihi wasallam. So Ahmed bin Isa bin Muhammad al-Naqib bin Ali al-Uraydi bin Ja'far al-Sadiq bin Muhammad al-Baqir bin Ali Zayn al-Abidin ibn al-Husayn al-Sibt bin Ali bin Abi Talib, who's married to Sayyidah Fatima Zahra, who's the daughter of Rasulullah. So that's his lineage. Ahmed bin Isa bin Muhammad al-Naqib bin Ali al-Uraydi bin Ja'far al-Sadiq. So the famous the 12 Imams go through Imam Ja'far al-Sadiq, and then they go to Musa al-Kadhim, who's a brother of Imam Ali al-Uraydi. The Sada who settled in Hadramawt from the descendants of Ali al-Uraydi, the brother of Imam Musa al-Kadhim. May Allah be pleased with them all. So he was born in Basra. He was born in Basra in Iraq, at the south of Iraq. In just trying to do different things at the same time. In 273 of the Hijrah, 886 of the Common Era. So he's born in 273 in Basra, and he was had great prominence, great wealth. You know, Iraq was and is a place of wealth and place of so he had influence. He had great knowledge. He was an environment of knowledge. We had as the Sada, the Ahlul Bayt had influence there and had power there. Were respected there. So he studied the sciences in his youth, and there was, he was, everything was, all the means, everything was there for him to, to have prominence in that society, wealth, knowledge, the potential to have political power and so on. But he could see what was to come. He could see that this was not in the interest of himself or his progeny to remain in Iraq, although there was great worldly benefits to have from that. And in fact, one of his relatives had a position of leadership. His brother had a position of leadership, and he told him to leave it. He continued to admonish him until his brother left that position. And this is a very important point that will come up again and again, is this avoidance of prominence and political leadership. The leadership and the guidance came about through other means, but not through political control or political governance. Although there's always a possibility, and it was could have been a means, but the Imam Al-Muhajir and others left that means. So he realized that this Iraq was a place of contention. There was always a struggle for power in Iraq. Who was going to control? This is the center of the Khilafah at that time, Iraq, and there was a place where there's always going to be struggle. The Ahlul Bayt are or be embroiled in that struggle as well. They're always seen as this is the time the Abbasids are ruling. The Ahlul Bayt is seen as posing a threat, is seen as being challenge, a potential challenge to power. So he saw in his best interests, interest of himself and his progeny, his family, to leave Basra, leave the wealth and leave that all the good things of that place and make hijrah. And that's why he gets the name al-Muhajir, the one who made hijrah in the way of those who came before him, in the way of the Prophet ﷺ. So he goes first to Mecca and Medina, spends time in the Haramain, makes Hajj, and then he's guided to choose Hadramawt as his destination, or Yemen as his destination, and finally Hadramawt. He finally settles in Hadramawt, finally settles in a place called Husaysa after moving from different places, and the places where he went to are known in Hadramawt, but he ends up in the place where he is now buried in Husaysa, between the two cities of Sayyun and Tarim. And you know, there were turbulent times. He was in turbulent times. There was there was a sect from the Qaramita, who a violent kind of extreme sect who caused much bloodshed and actually stole the black stone. This was for a good few decades. The black stone they stole the black stone and took it back to their lands in I believe in the kind of eastern part of Arabia. So when he actually made Hajj in that year, I think it's 318, there was just a gap. There was nothing where the stone was. He touched the gap, the kind of hole where the stone was. It was eventually returned, but it was a time of fitna. There was time of fitna. The Khawarij were around, you know, attacking, causing problems. There was different kind of revolts and different kinds of fitna in his time. So that's the reason, essentially, why he chose Hadramawt, this essentially dry and arid, you know, difficult place to live, dusty, difficult place to settle, difficult place to not, you know, there hasn't got nothing compared to the fertility of Iraq and the wealth and you know, not in the middle of it, not in the middle of the trade routes or anything, but quite isolated and quite far from the centers of power. But that's exactly the place that he chose, radiallahu anhu. And this is all from the insight and the guidance which he received. You know, these are people that are connected to the Prophet ﷺ. They're connected to Allah and the istikhara and the decisions they made that made him choose this valley for his descendants, and to settle in that valley. And he came again, even in Hadramawt there was dissension. There was a sect of the Khawarij, or branch of the offshoot of the Khawarij, called the Ibadiyya. Ibadiyya are an offshoot of the Khawarij. They had some control in Hadramawt. His arrival and his efforts brought an end to that, to their prominence. His diplomacy, his good character, his respect that he was held as a representative of the house of the Prophet ﷺ, it brought this unity and stability to Hadramawt. And he came with the way of Ahlul Sunnah. He was Shafi'i in madhab, Ash'ari in Aqidah, which is important. That, you know, often the Ahlul Bayt are accused of being you know, not being from the Ahlul Sunnah. He very much was, and that was his way, and his call was to those things, and that's what brought stability and unity to Hadramawt. And he was essentially setting the scene, setting the establishing himself for the future of his offspring. So you know, we look at history and we look at the different dynasties. We look at the you know, the Umayyads and the Abbasids, and then the Seljuks, and so on, these different dynasties, and that had an effect on history. And we look at these. That's how we tend to study history, and that's a natural thing. We look at the rulers and the battles and the conquests, but we perhaps miss the point sometimes of the real movers and shakers in history. And Imam Al-Muhajir was definitely one of those people. His hijrah and his efforts had a huge effect on history. History of the Islamic world, the Islamic world, of course, but also the world as a whole. Although we might not recognize that and may not see that, and historians may not recognize that fact, but his hijrah from Iraq to settling in Hadramawt was a very significant point in history. And as it's been mentioned, the migration of the Prophet ﷺ, the hijrah of the Prophet ﷺ was from Mecca to Medina, but the hijrah his offspring, of his family was from Basra to Hadramawt. Of course, that doesn't mean that there weren't Ahlul Bayt in other places who did great service to the deen. Of course, it doesn't mean that. It's not exclusive, not excluding other great, the Hassaniyin who went to North Africa, for example, but not, doesn't, not, they had their own hijrah, they had their own story. They're not negating that, the amazing things that came from that. But this is a very significant hijrah that had a huge impact upon the lives of millions of people. Because once he settled in Hadramaut, established the manhaj, established his progeny, then from him and from his offspring came forth many great imams, some of which we'll talk about inshallah, who then spread the deen far to the far corners of the earth. And that effort and that project continues to this day. So Jazahullah anna kulla khair. May Allah reward him the best of rewards, Imam Al-Muhajir. He was he died in 345, so he had about just over 20 years of da'wah and service in Hadramaut, and he's buried in the place where he settled, Sayyisa, and his grave is a place of ziyarah, a place that was visited and honored to this day, of course. And all the sada, all the habaib and the sada, the sayyids, his children essentially, all these great imams that we've been talking about, all his descendants, all the khair comes back to this move that he made, and this the choice that he made. So we're going to hear, inshallah, we'll have our guest joining us just to read give a bit of relief, a bit of change of scene, inshallah, to hear some of the words of Imam Al-Haddad describing Man Muhajir, inshallah. So we have Sayyid Ahmed bin Ja'far al-Saghaf, Jazahullah khairan. He's joined us this evening. Hopefully he'll join us in the future sessions to recite some of the poetry of these imams, or of other imams who describe these imams. So this is a poem of Imam Al-Haddad describing Imam Al-Muhajir. And so I'll pass over to Sayyid Ahmed bin Ja'far al-Saghaf. Is originally from Say'un, from the blessed household of the Prophet ﷺ. He's very kindly joining us tonight. We'll recite some of the verses of Imam Al-Haddad, inshallah. Assalamu alaikum, Sayyidi. Jazakumullah khair.
Jazakumullah khair. Wa alaikum assalam wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh. Can you hear me?
Yes, we can hear you.
MashaAllah. Jazakumullah khair, Sheikh Amin. And it is my pleasure to join you today.
Allah bless you.
Alhamdulillah. Jazakumullah khair. اللهم صل وسلم على سيدنا محمد وعلى آل سيدنا محمد. اللهم صل عليه وعزز بنور الدين ثم بنجله وعيسى يليه السيد المتحامي تحامى عن الدنيا وهاجر فاران إلى الله والأحداث ذات ضرام من البصرة الخضراء يخترق القرى ويلحق أغوارا لها بأكام إلى أن أتى الوادي المبارك فارتضى ومد به أطنابه لخيام فأصبح فيها ثاويا متوطنا بذرية مزمومة بزمام من البر والتقوى وحسن شمائل كرام السجايا أردفت بكرام بهم أصبح الوادي أنيسا وعامرا أمينا ومحميا بغير حسام وجاء عبيد الله لا يألو أسوتان بوالده الراقي لكل سنام وسار على آثارهم علويهم وبصريهم جد التقى بسلامي كذاك جديد جد حافظ عصره علي المعالي للشريعة حامي وجاء جمال الدين يتلو أبا له وجاء علوي بعده بنوامي وبالشيخ من رد الرسول سلامه وكان يصلي هكذا بدوامي وصاحب مرباط إمام وجامع تفرع منه أصل كل إمام كمثل الفقيه الحبر يقدم قومه وعميه والنجل الغيور أسامي والحمد لله رب العالمين.
ما شاء الله, tabarakallah. This is Imam Al-Haddad, who comes much later. He's a much later figure, but he's looking back at his salaf, his predecessors, describing those who came before him. He mentions Imam Al-Muhajir, تهام عن الدنيا وهاجر ثارا إلى الله والأحداث ذات الدرام, that he, turned away from the dunya, turned away from the worldly, all the words mentioned before, the worldly possibilities that were at his fingertips. وهاجر ثارا إلى الله, and he made hijrah. فَفِرُّوا إِلَى اللَّهِ, as Allah says in the Quran. Flee to Allah. So he fled to Allah. His hijrah was a reflection of that, of avoiding the tribulations and the difficulties of the time that he was in. من البصرة الخضراء يخترق القرى ويلحق أغوارا لها بآكامه. Made the difficult journey from the green of Basra, from village to village, from town to town, until he reached through difficult terrain, until he إلى أن أتى الوادي المبارك فارتضى ومد به أطنابه لخيامه, until he came to the blessed valley of Hadramawt and was content as a place to reside, to reside and to settle. فأصبح فيه ثاويا متوطنا بذرية مذمومة بزمام. So he resided there, and his progeny settled there. They were guided, or they were governed by من البر والتقوى وحسن الشمائل. They were people who were people of birr and taqwa, piety and righteousness and good qualities, the best of qualities. كرام السجايا أردفت بكرامي, that one had the best of qualities, the best of character, one generation after the next. بهم أصبح الوادي أنيسا وأعمرا أمينا محميا بغير حسامي. By them, by Imam Muhajir and those who came after, the valley of Hadramawt became a safe place, a place of comfort, a place of that was protected, without any بغير حسامي, as in without any sword being without any fighting taking place. So this is generally the islah that took place at the hands of these great sayyids was without any, it was all through diplomacy, all through good character, all through understanding, not through fighting and through force. Okay. Then Imam Haddad mentions the descendants in this blessed tree who come after Imam Al-Muhajir. Ubaydullah, his son was Ubaydullah, and then Alawi, his grandson is Alawi, and from Alawi we get the term Ba'alawi or Bani Alawi, the sons of Alawi. Okay, they become known as Bani Alawi or Ba'alawi, the descendants of Alawi. the children, the descendants of Alawi, who is the grandson of Imam Al-Muhajir. That's where the name comes from. Alawi is the grandson of Imam Al-Muhajir. They were given that name. Although in reality they're descendants of Imam Al-Muhajir, but the name was given, the name that stuck was al-Alawi, or the descendants of Alawi. It was Alawi bin Ubaidillah bin Ahmad al-Muhajir. And Imam Al-Muhajir is buried in Husayyisa, and his son Ubaidullah is buried across the valley in a place called near Bor, Summal, and then his son Alawi is buried near Tarim. So they're buried at different points down the valley. If you're traveling down the valley from Sayyun to Tarim, you go past these places where they're buried, and they get closer and closer until eventually they end up being the first of the Imams to live and to die in Tarim itself. But to begin with, they didn't settle in Tarim, they didn't live in Tarim. They would have visited, they would have had interaction with the people of Tarim, but they didn't make it their center until a few generations later, which is the next of our Imams that we're going to mention tonight, inshallah, which is Imam Ali bin Alawi Khali al-Qasam. So he is the great grandson of Imam Al-Muhajir. He is the first of the Alawi, but this is, if you notice, that this is almost 200 years have passed. He's from the time the Imam Al-Muhajir makes the Hijrah, almost 200 years passed before the first of the Alawi Sayyids settles in Tarim. It's Imam Ali bin Alawi Khali al-Qasam. And he's mentioned here in this verse, Imam Haddad, وبالشيخ من رد الرسول سلامه وكان يصلي هكذا بدوامي. He was known to have this immense, as all these Imams, it's not unique to him, but all these Imams had this incredible connection to their grandfather, the Prophet ﷺ. And this manifested in different ways, and different types of care and concern the Prophet ﷺ had for them. But in this Imam was known for the fact that his salam, when he gave salam to the Prophet ﷺ in his salah, assalamu alayka ayyuhan nabi wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh, they would hear the Prophet ﷺ's salam being returned. Wa alayka salam ya shaykh. They would hear that the Prophet himself returning the salam to them. And the reality, the Prophet ﷺ returns the salam to everyone. Assalamu alaykum ya Sayyidi Rasulullah. But this is some almost unseen, was kind of this unheard voice, if you like, was allowed to be heard. People could hear the voice of the Prophet ﷺ. That's just a reflection of this connection that they had to the Prophet ﷺ. Imam Muhajir had it, his predecessors and his successors, they had this immense wiratha, this immense inheritance and connection to the Prophet ﷺ. And that continues to this day. So he was the first of the Alawi Sayyids to settle in Tarim. He moved from his Bayt Jubayr, where he was born, to settle in Tarim. He made it the center from that time. This is the 6th century of the Hijrah, the 12th century of the Common Era. Tarim became the center of the al-Ba'alawi, or the Sada of al-Ba'alawi. And they were recognized as, from the time of Imam Al-Muhajir, they're recognized as their siyada, their leadership and their prominence was recognized by the people of Tarim and the surrounding valley. The main tribes we talked about Khatib and the Ba'fadl, and these tribes, they had already had this great knowledge, and they had this prominence. But when the Ahlul Bayt came, they recognized, they gave that recognition. They recognized this khususiyya we talked about earlier. They gave it its proper place, and they recognized that these people were the descendants of the Prophet ﷺ. They came with the knowledge and with the the guidance of the Prophet ﷺ came, and they recognized that fact. So Sayyid Ali, Imam Ali bin Ali Khali al-Qasam built Masjid Ba'alawi. He brought the mosques and houses in Hadramawt are built from clay bricks, mud bricks that are baked in the sun. He brought to make sure that what he was using was halal and was pure. He brought the bricks from his own land in Bayt Jubayr, a few miles from Tarim, and built them, used those to build Masjid Ba'alawi. Very simple structures, Okay, very simple structures. As the Mosque of Tarim, this is a picture of it here with the minaret. It's probably even simpler in his time, but just very, very basic structures. They weren't interested in madahir and zakhrafa, in the kind of adornment or the but they were interested in the jawhar, the reality of the places that they built. So he built this as Masjid Ba'alawi, which became the kind of center of the Sada. The other later Imams built masajid even close by to the Masjid Ba'alawi, but it was a center where it's like the center for the Imams of the Al-Ba'alawi and those who wanted to learn from them and receive from them. So he built Masjid Ba'alawi. To this day remains the focal point of Tarim. It's right in the heart of the city, of the old city of Tarim. It's a place where the people come together to this day for the great celebrations and significant events in the calendar of the year, the night of Ashura, the night of Masjid of Isra and Mi'raj, and so on. These are the 27th night of Ramadan. This is the place where everyone comes. The Quran is completed constantly there. The Quran, the Sahih Bukhari is completed. A place of knowledge, a place of remembrance, a place where all the great Imams would later come and pray and teach and lead the prayer. So that was Imam Ali bin Ali Khalid al-Qasam. He died in 529 and was the first of the Alawi Sayyids to be buried in the Zembal cemetery, which becomes filled with the graves of the great Imams. But he's the first to be buried there. Which leads us to, I think, the third and final Imam we're going to talk about tonight, inshallah, which is Imam Al-Faqih al-Muqaddam. Al-Faqih al-Muqaddam is a picture of his grave in Zambal, he's talked about. So he is born in Tarim 574, so a couple of generations after. He is Muhammad bin Ali. Muhammad bin Ali bin Muhammad bin Ali bin Muhammad Sahib Mirbat bin Ali Khalid al-Qasam. So he's a great grandson of the Imam we just mentioned, Ali bin Ali Khalid al-Qasam. His grandfather is Muhammad Sahib bin Mirbat, who's buried and lived and died in Mirbat, which is near Salalah in Oman. He's the grandson of Muhammad Sahib Mirbat. Born in Tarim in 574, 1178. And like all these Imams, they mastered the sciences. They mastered the Quran. They mastered the sciences in their youth. Okay, they became ulama in the early years. Okay, and he was called al-Faqih. He was known as al-Faqih or al-Faqih due to his mastery of the science of fiqh. All these great Imams were mastered the Sharia. Okay, they mastered the Sharia. Sometimes we have this concept of these. We see things through the lens of there's the great Sufis, but all the great Ahl Tasawwuf are great fuqaha as well. They weren't these kind of they were not in any. They were masters of Sharia before they were masters of anything else. So that he was known as faqih. In an environment of fiqh was studied and taught and respected. He was prominent. He had mastery. Radiallahu anhu. He had ijtihad to the point of ijtihad, radiallahu anhu. Master of the Sharia to the point of being a mujtahid, radiallahu anhu. But he took, at the same time, he was, as with all of these people, they were inheriting this tradition from their forefathers, from one after the other, going back to Ali Zayn al-Abidin, back to Imam Hussein. The outward knowledge and the inward struggle, the outward conveyance of knowledge of the Quran, the outward, and also the inward struggle, the mujahada, this working on the akhlaq and the self. Okay, he spent his life in struggle against himself. There's a cave that he'd worship in the valleys around Tarim, which is still visited to this day. This immense mujahada and salah and the Quran and recitation and dhikr, coupled with the teaching and the education, the outward knowledge. So he already had that spiritual state, and to top that off, which he, is inherited. He inherited this from his ancestors. These are the people that their sanad is their nasab. This is an important concept. The sanad is the nasab, meaning that your spiritual authority goes hand in hand with your lineage. So from father to son, the father was a great imam, was great, possessed of great knowledge, inward and outward. That's conveyed to the son, and so on and so on. So his sanad is his nasab. So he has that connection back to the Rasul Sallallahu Alaihi Wasallam, directly from imam to the Prophet Sallallahu Alaihi Wasallam. But on top of that, he received another spiritual authority, or another spiritual investiture from the great imam of the Maghrib, of Al-Ghawth Shu'aib Abu Madyan, the great imam who the Shadili branch, the Shadiliya take as he's one of their great sources, Imam Al-Ghawth Abu Madyan, who is buried in modern day Algeria. But he sends his khirqa, or sends his he makes it a symbolic investiture of authority to al-Faqih al-Muqaddam. They don't physically meet, but he sends it by means of intermediaries to the Sayyidina al-Faqih al-Muqaddam to show he's passing on that spiritual authority. So there's two streams coming together, or more coming. There's others as well, but two main ones coming together. The stream of what's directly inherited from father to son, going back to the Prophet ﷺ, and then this other stream coming from Ghawth Abu Madyan, also through the Ahlul Bayt and through the great Imams. But that in that authority, in a sense, gave him changed the situation, that he became more openly called to tariqah, openly took on students, and to the tasawwuf that his predecessor practice was more low key, if you like. It was just within the confines of the family and the confines of the immediate students and so on. But this is now, he was not that it was had a big it was on a big scale, not to say that at all, but it was more formal. It was now the formal beginnings of a spiritual path of a tariqah that came from the time of Faqih Muqaddam onwards, such that all the later shuyukh and imams, they without unanimously regard him as the grand sheikh, if you like, the grand sheikh of tariqah, Faqih Muqaddam. But in spite of that, very little is actually known about him. We don't have a lot of things on record about him, or his life, or his works, but it was his time was spent in mujahada and ibadah and in tasleek, in training his students, and his work within his students and the people that he left behind, the people that he nurtured and he raised, radiallahu anhu. And he took this made this symbolic statement of actually breaking his sword, saying that the family of the Prophet ﷺ, I'm not going to get involved in these struggles, these power struggles, and these rival, being seen as a threat by other tribes. We're not interested in that. We're not going to lower ourselves. So that's why he broke his sword, to say that we're not taking arms to stake our claim to control or to prominence. Our role is in social rectification, is in doing the work on the ground, guidance of individuals and community, not through force or through political power, but through honoring those ties of social ties, of advising, of rectifying, bringing tribes together, of being sources of guidance and teaching and counsel, but not having that position of force and or carrying arms. Okay, in spite of the fact that there were times when there were turbulent times that came and went in the valley of Hadramawt, but he set the example for his successors not to get involved in this. Avoid that. Don't lower yourself to and don't drag yourself in that quagmire of conflict. So that was his role. He established the annual group visit, the ziyarah of Nabi al-Hud, which is an important annual event in the calendar of Hadramawt. So it's also, we recognize in the fact that Prophet Hud you know, it was lived and died in Hadramawt, and visiting him and honoring that tradition and using it as a means of connection to Allah and to prophethood and to Risala and to the Quran. So he established that, which went from strength to strength, and to this day it continues as a tradition. He died in 653, 1255. He passed his. They asked him, who should be the sheikh? Who should they go to after him? And he said, al-Fuqara, meaning his wife, Sayyidah Zainab, who was who was with him at every stage. And there's many great women. Very little. There's not that much known about the early Imams. There's even less known about the early women. But Sayyidah Zainab al-Fuqara was someone who was with him in his struggles and in his mujahadat and his raising the children. He left behind he's had five great Imams who were his children, but also in the spiritual sense. He said, go to her if you want your counsel, if you want your guidance. Go to al-Fuqara, radiyallahu anha. And he became known as al-Faqih al-Muqaddam, the one who's given prominence, the one who's given preference, one who's brought first, and that's one that's because he is the father of the tariqah, he's the spiritual father of Tarim, he's the spiritual father of the path to the Alawi path, and he's also the first that's visited. And when you visit the graveyard of Zambal, he is the first one. The etiquette dictates that you visit him first, out of respect for his contribution, his status. So we're going to finish with another qasida with Sayyid Ahmad, inshallah, which is again Imam Haddad. If you like, talking about his about Faqih Muqaddam and praising him and mentioning some of his qualities, inshallah. Sayyid Ahmad.
مرحبا. مقدم القوم قطب الأولياء ومن سما بمجد على القاصي مع الداني شيخ الشيوخ وإستاذ الأكابر أرباب البصائر من حبر ورباني شريف أصل ونفس جامع رسخت أقدامه في كشوفات وعرفان إمام شرع له الباع الطويل به علم وحلم وتحقيق بإيقان وشيخ أهل طريق الله قاطبة بلا دفاع ولا طعن لطعان غوث العباد وغيث للبلاد به تحيا الجدوب ويروي كل عطشان دعا إلى الله بالقول السديد وبالفعل الحميد على علم وبرهان هاد هدى الله رب العالمين به أهل الضلالة من غاو وحيران كانت بدايته مثل النهاية من أقرانه فاعتبر هذا بتبيان محمد بن علي شيخ مشيخة لنا وأصل فروع ثمرها داني يا سيدي يا جمال الدين يا سندي أدرك صريخا أخا غم وأحزان يدعو بك الله في تفريج كربته وما عناه دعاء الخائف الجاني فقم به وأغثه واحم جانبه مما يحاذر في سر وإعلان أنت الغياث لنا في كل نائبة بعد الإله وطه خير عدنان واللهم صل وسلم وبارك عليه وعلى آله.
MashaAllah, Jazakallah khair. So once again, Imam Al-Haddad describing this great illustrious Imam, مقدم القوم قطب الأولياء ومن سما بنجم على مقاسم عداني. He's the Muqaddam al-Qawm. He's the one that's, as we mentioned before, given that preference and that position of authority. Shaykh al-Shuyukh Ustad al-Akabiri. He is the Shaykh al-Shuyukh. He's the Shaykh of the other, he's the teacher of teachers. Ustad al-Akabiri. He's also known as Ustad al-A'lam, the greatest teacher, greatest master. Radiallahu anhu. We will mention everything. بشريف عسل منفس جامع رسخت أقدامه في كشوفات وعرفاني. He mentioned some of the, again, this spiritual state that he had, and that he is the kind of the source of support and assistance for those who seek him. داعٍ إلى الله بالقول السديد وبفعل الحميد على علم وبرهان. He is the one who called to Allah بالقول السديد, with the correct and the best of words and praiseworthy actions. على علم وبرهان, with knowledge and with burhan. That's just like sums up the way of him and his forefathers and his predecessors. They were callers to Allah. Their concern was a guidance, was the rectification of society, the guidance, people being guided to Allah at all different levels, from out of disbelief into the fold of Islam, from to elevation in the ranks of Islam and Iman, to the higher ranks of Ihsan. They were callers and guides to that. هاد هدى الله رب العالمين به أهل الضلالة من غاب وحيران. He was a means of guidance. Allah used him as a means of guidance for people who are astray, people who are in confusion. كانت بداية مثل النهاية من أقرانه فاعتبر هذا بتبيان. His beginning was like the end point of his contemporaries or those around him. Okay, other people, the end point they reached in their spiritual progress was just like the beginning of his point. So may Allah be pleased and allow us to benefit from him. Again, it's most of that's just a tiny tip of the iceberg of all these great imams, and very little is actually mentioned. A lot of time has elapsed since they passed away. Not a great deal is preserved, but the tradition which they embodied is preserved, and that's what they wanted to preserve. They weren't interested in themselves as individuals, but they're interested in the fruit. As it says at the end, "Tamruha dani." The fruit is close, is easy to prick. Okay, that's why we're benefiting from the likes of Umar, Hafidhullah, Habib Qadim, and others, and their students, is because of the thamar is dani. The fruit is close and easy to pick, and that's what they wanted. They didn't want to be remembered as individuals, but they wanted the tradition to be preserved, and the tradition connects us to Allah. And Prophet Allah bless us, inshallah, in these lessons, in these classes taking place, all the brothers and sisters who are following, and the brothers who are translating and teaching. Inshallah, may it means of connection in these times of that we're living in, inshallah. May I bless all our teachers, preserve them, allow us to benefit by them. اختم لنا بالفاتحة سيدنا حبيبه.
لا توكم عندكم الفاتحة.
أنا عندك
لا عندكم
لا
الشيخ أمين عندكم تو.
أنا ختم بس.
الفاتحة بالقبول قبال صلاح كل حال. الله يغفر الذنوب ويستر العيوب ويجعل هذه الجلسة مباركة، يحفظ الحاضرين فيها ويبارك فيهم ويجعل نفعها خير وبركة للجميع إن شاء الله، تعود بركاتها علينا وعلى أولادنا وعلى ذرارينا وعلى أسرنا الجميع. ويحقق آمالنا وأغراضنا ويحقق فينا آمال فينا شيوخنا على هذه النية وما نويناه وما نوى أهلنا وأسلافنا وما نواه الحاضرين ومن ذكرناهم في هذا المجلس. أدرجنا نياتنا في نياتهم ومقاصدنا في مقاصدهم وأعمالنا في أعمالهم. توك شيخ أمين كمل.
لا عندك
كمل. ختم توك كمل.
على حضرة النبي صلى الله عليه وسلم.
اللهم صل وسلم عليه. بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم.
سبحانك اللهم وبحمدك أشهد أن لا إله إلا أنت أستغفرك. جزاكم الله خير. بما أن الله استودع لكم الله. السلام عليكم ورحمة الله وبركاته.